This is AIM Agenda. Thanks for your company this morning. With me now, Liberal MP Josh Frydenberg and Labor MP Ed Husic. Gentlemen, welcome. On the asylum seeker debate, first of all, Josh, last night Christopher Pyne said on the Showdown program on Sky that a change on TPVs might actually be a game changer, would go a long way towards a compromise. This morning, Mr Morrison is out there saying there's been no shift, that Malaysia's the stumbling block. What is the coalition stance here? It seems a little confused, the message this morning.
Look, TPVs are absolutely a part of our tripartite position when it comes to border protection, namely towing back the boats where it's safe to do so, having offshore processing in Nauru, and having temporary protection visas. Look, this is a very difficult issue. There are a lot of desperate people who want to come to Australia for good reason. I understand that, and hundreds of lives have been lost. In fact, Ed and I are both products of migrant Australia, so to speak. So we understand we need to have a very open and fair immigration system. But that's different from the point that Australia has a sovereign right to protect its borders. And during the Howard years, it worked. The policies of the government worked. In the last 5 years of the Howard government, there were only 300 unauthorised arrivals. Since Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard have been at the helm, there have been more than 19,000 unauthorised arrivals. That's a massive jump. Plus, the cost to the taxpayer has gone from tens of millions to well over $1 billion a year.
That's the
issue.
That's the issue, sure, but it's about resolving the issue now,
correct.
Isn't it? And things have changed. Andrew Metcalf of the Immigration Department, he was the architect in many ways of the Pacific solution, which was the Howard government approach. Mm-hmm. He now says some of the elements of that are now redundant.
Yes.
That you need another look at it. You don't seem to be taking that look.
But look, we know what worked, Kieran. We know what worked, and we know what happened since those policies were unravelled. And I think that's the key point here. The government wants to have an offshore processing arrangement with Malaysia. Now, Malaysia is not one of the 148 signatories to the UN Refugee Convention. So we say to the government, we will support offshore processing in Nauru, which is a signatory to the Refugee Convention. Why do you want to go to Malaysia, where human rights can't be protected?
Well, the policies were unravelled, Ed, as Josh rightly points out, and since then, the numbers that he also refers to are accurate. So it was a Labor decision to change. Why not go back to the coalition policy and just see if it works? Because, quite frankly, the status quo is not working, obviously.
Well, as you pointed to a few moments ago, the people that were instrumental in helping frame and implement the policy are saying clearly that this approach may have worked once. I don't agree that it did, by the way, but they're saying that times have changed and therefore the approach needs to alter accordingly. So from my perspective, certainly I don't think this is the time. We need clarity. We need certainty in terms of dealing and resolving this issue. We don't need one coalition frontbencher saying one thing and the other saying another thing. We all need to step up. As Rob Oakeshock said a few moments ago on your program, he said it's time for parliamentarians to step forward and politicians to step back. From my point of view, I can't abide a situation where we have people... I keep going back to the last moments of those people who die and perish. And I just, from my point of view, think that if something can be done here to save those people there, that is the right thing for us all to do. And that's what we need to do. We need to put the politics aside.
Well, there's a few elements too. The offshore processing, that's the bottom line. You both agree with that. The two major parties agree with that. It seems, and it has done for months now. In fact, the last tragedy that we saw before Christmas, it's nonsensical that we've got a political situation in this country where the two major parties, your parties, agree with offshore processing, and yet we've got the policy in place that the Greens would actually be closer to, and that is onshore processing.
And we've also said, Kieran, like if you look back as well, I mean, you've asked us to look back at history. You know, when John Howard approached Kim Beazley and said, this is what our government wishes to see happen, despite our reservations, we made it happen, recognising that the government of the day made the call on these issues, and that was why Nauru was able to proceed. We have said simply that the government of the day should have the ability to enact offshore processing, and both sides of politics should respect that. That's all we seek. And so I certainly think, as I've said before, I'm not going to come on this program and be full of vitriol, and I'm not, for whoever's around the table on this, from my point of view, let's just get this sorted, because as parliamentarians we have a responsibility to secure the safety of people, people that are here, people that are coming here.
Okay, well, what about some of the nature of the debate? Because not everyone has been as civil as you two have this morning on this issue. We've heard comments. In fact, I'll play one of them for you and get your reaction to it. This was Mark Dreyfus yesterday on the doors of Parliament House.
It's disgraceful the way in which he's approaching this. He said this morning, what is there to negotiate? And that tells you all you need to hear about Tony Abbott's attitude to this. You're left thinking that he sees political advantage in people dying. That's the real disgrace of this.
This morning, Don Randall, one of your Liberal colleagues, has apparently returned serve at Mark Dreyfus. What do you think of the spray and the counter-attack that we're seeing here?
Look, I think Mark Dreyfus's comments are unfortunate, and I think we need to, as Ed says, we need to take the heat out of this debate. I don't think we should personalise it. It's about getting the policy settings right. It's about delivering for the Australian people what they want, effective border protection, but also a fair and humane policy. That's what they expect of us. And we're saying that Malaysia is not that. So you can talk as much as you like, Kieran, but Malaysia, which is a policy capped at only 800 people, will be game played by the people smugglers, and the deterrent will not be there. Whereas we know what did work. So we're saying on our side, we want to get an effective policy. I'd much rather be talking about tax reform with you, infrastructure development, how to put more money in health and education. I don't like this debate. I don't think it's healthy. I don't like parliamentarians going at each other on such issues, which, as Ed has said, has led to the hundreds and hundreds of deaths. But we have to get the policy settings right, and we think that John Howard did get those policy settings right, despite what Ed said. The numbers tell that story, and we'd like to go back to it.
But on the issue, if you look at recent history, I know there are reservations in terms of the Malaysia agreement, because I've had people close to me who have very different views from my perspective on Malaysia. Certainly, as I've said many times before, and we've discussed this previously, my perspective on this has been conditioned entirely by being involved in that joint committee on Christmas Island and standing out there and seeing in the eyes of people who appeared before the committee who were still suffering the trauma. Now, when we announced Malaysia, you looked at basically there was a drying up, the evaporation of numbers, as people basically were saying to people smugglers, we want our money back and we don't want to go there. In the aftermath of the impasse, you've seen numbers increase. And I think the other point I'd want to make, Kieran, quickly to the Greens is, the Greens have massive reservations about offshore processing. But in effect, we've had no offshore processing, and what they've wanted to see, which is just people get on boats. There is an unintended terrible consequence of that. When they get on the boats and they overload those boats, and those boats aren't there, they're not giving free berth to people, and they're overloaded, and they don't have enough safety or life jackets.
Absolutely.
This is putting people's lives at risk, and we wouldn't tolerate it on Australian shores, so why do we turn a blind eye to it if it's on the seas coming over here?
All right, well, let's hope that there is some progress before you two and the rest of the Parliament breaks for
meeting happening now
for winter.
Windsor and all the.
There is that meeting happening as we speak. Yes, of the crossbench. Let's hope the leadership can have a similar sort of conciliatory discussion at some stage on this and soon. Now let's look at the slipper matter. Yesterday, it featured in the court, but also in the Parliament. Documents to the federal court suggesting or alleging that extracts of Mr. Slipper's diary had been offered to journalists but also to LNP figures, and that this was part of a vexatious conspiracy to bring him down. What did you make of the allegations by the Slipper legal team yesterday?
Well, look, the issue was sexual harassment made against a staffer. That's the issue at play here. But in terms of who said what and to whom, I'm not going to get into that, because this matter is before the courts. And to quote Julia Gillard, our Prime Minister, she said she's not going to be judge and jury when it came to the Thompson matter because it was going before the court. If she's going to adopt that standard when it came to Craig Thompson, which wasn't even before the courts, then when it comes to this slipper case that is before the courts, I don't think we should be running a commentary on it.
That's a valid point, isn't it? That people should be allowing the courts to handle these matters, and that's something that the government had also said in relation to the slipper matter.
Absolutely, and I agree entirely. But what I don't want to see is a convenient shifting of goalposts here. I mean, this is effectively the argument we raised for the last 12 months in relation to Craig Thompson, in relation to the investigations that were taking place, and yesterday, because it didn't suit the opposition, where Anthony Albanese was making a point about and calling on journalists to make a decision about whether or not they report the events or participate in them, we then had this. Now, be consistent. That's what people want. And certainly...
Who's going to be consistent? I'm just quoting the Prime Minister on Thompson, and now
I don't disagree with it.
But now you go to the...
No, but I was very particular. I was particularly referring to Anthony Albanese's point that he made yesterday in reference to journalists and their involvement and what it appears to be in terms of their escalated involvement, if I could put it that way, in this matter.
But to be honest, you personally attacked journalists yesterday.
No, he did not. He did not do that. You look at what he said. He said that the bulk of journalists report fairly, accurately. He said that it is important to observe that there is not a line crossed. That was the point that's made. But I come back to my point, Josh, that there has to be consistency.
All right, let's look at one last issue. We've only got 2 minutes left, but flyers apparently on the carbon tax matter going out to butchers and various other small businesses. David Bradbury yesterday said that Tony Abbott's putting these small businesses in the firing line for potential fines from the ACCC. Well, why should businesses be forced to cough up if a flyer might have some wrong information? Surely they shouldn't be the ones that are punished on that.
So the word of the day, I think, from my end is consistency. And the reason I say that is because when you look at what the coalition did when in government through the transition to the new tax system, they did exactly the same thing. That is, they said to businesses, as we implement the GST, the coalition, we will not tolerate people putting prices above what the pass-through effect is, and that if they use this as an opportunity to just, score a bump up to their profit, that's not tolerated. We're doing exactly the same thing to make sure that the public can have the confidence that the pass-through is absolutely accurate. And I think it is a very important warning that businesses do not follow the advice that's being put out by Bruce Bilson and then use that as a cover to increase prices, because they're putting themselves at risk, and I think that's valuable advice.
But surely there is the scope to raise prices to some extent, because that's the whole framing of the policy, isn't it? And well, that's what they're doing. That's all they're saying. They're saying to their customers, there's going to be a carbon tax, we're going to lift our prices.
And we're also saying, be careful about, to those businesses that think that this is the time to move prices higher than the pass-through effect of the carbon price.
Well, Kieran, the government's been caught out badly on this, because Commander Bradbury and Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan go out and say, well, the ACCC will be investigating, there could be up to $1 million in fines for these small businesses. The ACCC's put out a statement. It said that the facts in those flyers were absolutely accurate. We used Treasury's own numbers. So you've been caught out. And the government goes and spends $70 million of taxpayers' money on advertising, and suddenly when small businesses want to do a bit of their own advertising, they don't like it. That's hypocrisy. That's my message for the day.
Ed Husic,
it's all from him, it's all from me, it's over to you.
And it's all from me. That's all for Aim Agenda. Thanks for your company.
Thank you.